Hi, this is the Observations Podcast for Sunday, the 27th of August, 2023. Welcome back to the podcast. I am Dale Franks. As you can see, Michael Wade is on, but does not appear to have a camera working at the moment, so we may have a little bit of troubleshooting that we have to do to get started here. You may have heard the little ding over the music a few minutes ago. That was Michael texting me, asking if I can see him. So I will address Michael directly at this point. Excuse me for one moment while we do this live. Michael, hi. I see that you are hooked up to Zoom. I neither hear you nor see you. I just see your name on the screen.
All right, I'm trying to figure out what's different.
Okay, well, have you turned your camera on in Zoom?
In Zoom.
Yeah, start video.
I didn't think. Oh, you know what? Yep. That's
Hey,
what it is.
there we go. Everything else appears to be working fine. We have sound, we have volume, and we have you.
I'm like a boomer with technology.
Actually, both of us are, really, aren't we? Technology boomers.
Well, you're more like a millennial with technology. I'm more like a boomer with technology.
Well, it is different whenever you work in technology as a regular daily job. I mean, you're kind of forced to stay up with it. I mean, it's hard to believe that my father, who is at this point 80 years old, runs 3 Linux web servers from his apartment. And actually,
Does he really?
And yeah, it actually runs his own website off of his own Linux web server in his apartment because, you know, like me, he's
For
worked
his
in
pastorship?
IT. Yeah. So like me, he's worked in IT all his life. So it's very odd to be talking to an 80-year-old man on the phone who's talking to me about, yeah, I think I may need to edit a driver for a peripheral on my computer. I may have to just write it myself in C++. Okay, sure, Dad. Go ahead.
Good on you.
But there's not probably too many 80-year-olds who feel comfortable just saying, yeah.
Are you kidding? My parents can barely deal with texting.
Yeah, my dad is like, yeah, I prefer to work in PHP. It's a very good language to work in, and I can make it object-oriented. Okay, fine, Dad, you're 80 years old. Shouldn't you be trying to figure out how Facebook works?
Yeah, I mean, isn't there a badminton tournament? Shuffleboard, something.
Well, you know, he does live in a retirement community. I'm sure that there is some of that going on.
They got to have bingo.
Although, my dad lives in Houston, Texas. He says today the high in Houston is going to be 109 with, probably 40 or 50% humidity. So I'm not sure that 80-year-old people are going to be outdoors playing shuffleball in that kind of weather.
They could air condition the spaces down there.
I suppose they could, but I suspect it's all outdoors. Anyway, the thing I wanted to talk about today, and I think it may take up the entire podcast because it is so expansive. This week in Tablet Magazine, and we might as well just jump right into it because
which is a great magazine, by the way. I guess it's sort of Jewish oriented, but
yes. It's
a
Jewish magazine.
A very informative magazine. They do some really good in-depth articles.
They really do. And this is one that is equally as in-depth and it is in equal parts, in-depth and frightening.
Yeah.
We've talked before about, disinformation and censorship. This is the very first time I've seen culminated into a single article pretty much everything we need to know about the censorship industrial complex that has been built up in this country. And
not just here.
Oh, not just here. For those of you who don't know, the European Union this week just passed into I don't know, is it a law or is it a regulation? Whatever it is, there's a European.
I think it's a regulation.
Yeah, there's a European Union regulation that basically sets up a censorship board for the entire EU. Every country must comply. Every country must implement censorship against disinformation. This is the worst assault on, certainly in American terms, it is the worst assault on our constitutional rights and the right of free speech that we have seen since the founding of the United States, I would say. It's not super unusual in Europe. Europe has, in our lifetimes, had their own totalitarian regimes. Very few remember that Generalissimo Francisco Franco ran a fascist, quote unquote,
still dead.
Who is still dead, created a fascist republic in Spain in the 1930s that he ruled until his death in 1974 or 1975. Of course, all of Eastern Europe was under communist dictatorship right up until the early 1990s, until the
wall came down.
The wall came down in 1989.
91?
1989. October 3rd, no, 1990. October 3rd, 1990. It all came down. In any event, I want to go through this article. I know we've both looked at it, and I have it extensively highlighted because of what I want to talk about, because this lays down exactly how horrifying the assault on free speech is and what they're aiming to do in the United States. And I just wanted to cover it. If it takes the
Before we go too far, can we just talk about the picture?
Yeah.
It's supposed to be a raven, I'm assuming.
It is a raven or a crow.
A camera eye that's watching all you do. And this is obviously hearkening to Edgar Allan Poe and the Raven. I think that's absolutely brilliant. That's just to me that's just such a very artistic way of summarizing everything in a very poetic way. You know, this raven that's predicting your doom is also watching you and bringing about your doom.
Yeah, it is a very appropriate cover image for this article. The article starts off by talking about Joseph McCarthy, only in the sense that Joseph McCarthy, when he first came out, had a list of 205 communists, and then came out the next day and said it was 57. And then every time he talked, he had a different number of communists. The important thing was that he knew there were communists in the State Department. And one of the things about McCarthy,
I mean, he was right, but he didn't know.
He was right, but
he didn't know exactly what he thought he knew.
Yeah, he didn't know specifically who, but as it turns out, he was right. For example, Alger Hiss.
Right.
No more needs to be said. However, what they do contrast with this is that when McCarthyism happened, there were, in opposition to him, people in the U.S. government, in the national defense, also in the State Department, but in other areas of the U.S. government and in the press that pushed back on at least many of McCarthy's specific claims, because what he was doing was rabble-rousing. What he was doing was fear-mongering. And he didn't really have the evidence that he said he was going to have, or that he said he had. And then, of course, McCarthyism finally went away. Finally, it was the United States Army whose counsel, asked publicly, at the end, Senator, have you no shame? And that kind of broke everything up. And then, of course, McCarthy died. He was an alcoholic and had other personal problems. And that was it. Until 2017. And by the way, before we get into it, please hit like and subscribe. It helps the channel out. Leave a comment so that you can comment on some of the things that we are talking about. All of this engagement.
Check that bell.
Click that bell for notifications. All of these things consist of interaction that helps the channel. So if you would like to help the channel, please do so and interact with us. In fact, I have my own little thing here that I can actually turn on and play, which I do occasionally, down in the corner
Oh, I love that.
The other corner
That's so
that says
cute.
comment, like, and subscribe. So comment, like, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell.
Wow, we are fancy.
Oh yeah, technically we are untouchable. So our story starts here for this particular article in 2017. There was an outfit run by a guy named Clint Watts, about which more in due course, who created this outfit, Hamilton 68, and their fundamental claim was that Russia was throwing out all of this disinformation through Russian agents on social media. They infiltrated Twitter. They, as it says here, they sowed chaos and they helped Donald Trump win the election. It was a lie. All of it was a lie. Yoel Roth, Twitter safety officer, said that they are just unilaterally labeling real people as Russian stooges without any evidence. They knew this. They didn't push back against it, again, about which more in due course, because we have to learn who they were going to push back against.
Well, it's interesting. Yoel Roth is an interesting character because he was one of the few holdovers by Elon Musk when he took over. And he did try to push back. I mean, not hard, but he did. I mean, he was aware that this was BS that was being shoved down their throats.
And he said we ought to, yeah, internally, he said, you know, we ought to do something about this. But of course, nothing was done. But whereas McCarthy had all this resistance from, you know, journalists and intelligence agencies and in Congress itself, those groups all lined up to support this this censorship thing that was going on. And of course, we now know that Hamilton 68 was just a hoax perpetrated against the American people. Nobody cared. Didn't make any headlines in any news.
And we still don't really know everybody that was behind that either, too.
No, we don't. We do know that Clint Watts ran it. And he will appear throughout our narrative and not as a good actor in it. It all started off in 2016. December 23rd, Barack Obama signed the Countering Foreign Propaganda and Disinformation Act. Initially, this was supposed to be about, you know, finding terrorists online. It's part of the global war on terror. And so they started creating these agencies to look and go after these terrorists. But of course, the global war on terror ended. But we were going to be doing this. We're going to spend billions of dollars on setting up a counter disinformation complex to go after the heathen foreigners. And I guess it sounded good in 2016, but of course, now the global war on terror is over. And it didn't take too long, because we get to the fall of 2017, the FBI opening its Foreign Influence Task Force, monitoring social media accounts to flag anyone who's trying to discredit U.S. individuals or institutions. And part of this, you know, about this time is when Hamilton 68 blew up. Yoel Roth internally said, hey, this is all a hoax. This is not true. But they didn't say a word. There was a reason for this, because who they were going to push back against, but we'll get to that. Instead, they let Hamilton 68 just run freely. So all this talk about disinformation that they started to talk about, they had a prime source of disinformation, and they let it go. And this whole thing began to morph. Because after Trump, who was, of course, just the worst thing that could possibly happen to America.
It's the bull in the china shop.
Yeah, the bull in the china shop, and we'll get into him too here in a little bit. They began to redefine disinformation as a whole of society problem that requires a whole of society response. And
Takes a village.
yeah, it takes a village. And so we begin to getting into these Trump-Russia claims. It gets amplified by the media, who has, as it's pointed out here, utterly disgraced itself. And a lot of people blame the media for what happens, but they're not the big players here. The big player is the government and the information war itself. Because what has happened...
Okay, so hold on. Let's back up a little bit there. I do agree that the media is not the immediate problem, but it is a contributory and necessary exacerbation of the problem. If the media had pushed back even a little bit at all, things would have been way different. And they didn't. They just went along. They were perfectly happy to carry the government water, as long as it was a democratic government. So I don't think the press gets off easy here. I agree with you that the government is the main progenitor and problem here, but the press has been utterly absent in any of its actual duties to allegedly inform the public. They have been covering up, and they're still doing it. And they are protecting. They have no problems about going after misinformation if it goes against their preferred narrative. So I don't give them a pass at all. They were an active participant in this.
That is true, and they will become an even more active participant as we begin to move through our story today. But at least here at the start, as it says, the American press, once the guardian of democracy, was hollowed out to the point where it could be worn like a hand puppet by U.S. security agencies and party operatives. This sentence, the way that they put it...
That's a great way to put it.
Well, no, actually it's not. Because it says it was hollowed out to the point. And that implies...
It was welcoming.
That implies that there was some, the U.S. security agencies and party operatives managed to take advantage of this. You're not taking advantage of a willing victim. Someone who literally wants to parrot what you say. And I think it is fair to say that the press really does want to parrot what whoever, the experts, the government, the ruling class says, because they want to be a part of it and they know what the party line is. So this is not a case of the press being...
Putinesca.
Yeah, this is not a case of the press being subverted. This is a case of the press willingly complying because they
throwing
agree.
Themselves prostrate in front of their supposed leaders.
Exactly. So what happened really quickly, certainly during the 2016 presidential election, then immediately after it, is the government just jumping into this idea that we have to combat disinformation. And after all, why not? We have this huge billions of dollars effort that we've shoved into the CIA and the NSA and whatever for monitoring these, for monitoring social media anyway. So it becomes a very easy jump, especially as the war on terror begins to wind down. Well, we can't just disband all these agencies. We can't just fire all these people. We have to have something for them to do.
There's a lot of use right there.
Yeah, why not have them look at American social media? And so what we end up with is a government that says, well, anti-establishment comments are essentially sedition. And so therefore, we have to take this entire infrastructure that we built up throughout the global war on terror and that the Obama administration formalized at the end of 2016, and we're just going to turn that towards domestic politics because of, this Russian interference and all of this other stuff. So, it starts off with Russian interference, and now it just goes after anything that goes against whatever the government's party line, whatever the ruling class's party line is, We just have to control that information. So, whether it's error or injustice or some ill-defined harm that comes from speech, we have to go ahead and control it. And as they put here, that is a goal worthy of leaders who believe themselves to be infallible or comic book supervillains. And that's exactly what we are seeing happening now. As they put it, it's something monstrous that's taking shape in America. And what that is a state that is organized on the principle that it exists to protect the sovereign rights of individuals is being replaced by a digital leviathan that wields power through opaque algorithms and the manipulation of digital swarms.
Protect itself. It's protecting Leviathan. It's not actually even concerned for protecting us.
And it can basically be boiled down to this. You can't be trusted to think for yourself.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
No.
I mean, and we saw this throughout the COVID panic, right? You can't be trusted to go out into public. You can't be trusted to buy seeds to make a garden. You can't be trusted, period. You are not trustworthy. We need to hold your hand and guide you.
Oh, and by the way, you can't
what we want you to do.
Oh, and it goes further than that. You can't be trusted with certain types of information.
That's right. You can't be trusted to discern the difference between fact and fiction.
Exactly. So if someone comes along with this outlandish claim that COVID was accidentally released from a laboratory in China, you can't be allowed to see that. And you certainly can't be allowed to say it.
You might get the wrong idea.
Yeah, and if you say it, well, then you are itself a purveyor of disinformation. Right. And
we saw this with the whole Tom Cotton thing in the New York Times. I mean, different context, but the same idea that, hey, maybe we need to bring in, this was his argument, was that maybe we need, with the 2020 Black Lives Matters, mostly peaceful riots, maybe we need to bring in the National Guard to set up shop and have a little bit of control over this stuff before it gets out of hand, instead of letting cities burn down. And he was able to get that printed in the New York Times on the opinion page, and yet everybody at the New York Times threw a hissy fit, and the editor got fired just because he let him speak, let him have an opinion. And we saw it absolutely throughout all of the pandemic, the supposed pandemic. We saw, who was it? Who's the guy out of San Francisco? Bhattacharya or something like that?
Jay Bhattacharya.
Yeah, Bhattacharya.
At Berkeley.
Yeah. He got totally shut down. Scott Atlas got totally shut down. I mean, they weren't allowed to speak about these things. They weren't given no space at all.
Yeah, and by the way, these aren't some wild-eyed conspiracists. Jay Bhattacharya is a professor of medicine at Berkeley. One presumes that if he has enough expertise to teach future generations of doctor at the University of California at Berkeley, that he has some level of expertise that...
And it turned out he was right.
We might want to listen to. Oh, yeah, it did turn out he was right. In fact, we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on, because it's not just him. We've got Alex Berenson and other people who were actually banned for saying true things.
Right.
They just weren't the things that we were supposed to say. So the guy who...
Oh, good. Clint Watts, yes.
So here we are at Clint Watts. This is the guy who really basically started off this whole Russian disinformation thing. He wrote an article in 2016, How Russia Dominates Your Twitter Feed to Promote Lies, and Trump too. And he is the source of all of this. He became the media's go-to expert on all of this stuff, Russian trolls, Kremlin disinformation, and all of this stuff, while all of the time lying through his teeth about this And it was Watts who came up with this Hamilton 68 dashboard for disinformation and spearheaded it with these claims that Russia
So
interfered
explain
with the
Hamilton
election.
68 for our listeners a little bit, because I think that's really important. You have to know how influential Hamilton 68 was.
Go ahead.
So Hamilton 68 was the fallback for literally everybody reporting the news on Russian disinformation. They were the source of basically every story that you saw in the New York Times, in the Washington Post, in the LA Times, San Francisco Chronicle. This was the go-to source. And they were full of shit. I mean, essentially, they were simply making it up. They had essentially bought the Hillary party line, and I don't know that anybody has discovered yet any direct connection between the Hillary campaign and Hamilton 68, but it was pretty clear that what they were pushing out there was the Hillary line that the Russians backed Trump, and this is how they're doing it with Facebook, memes and messages, and the same on Twitter. And yet, when you go back after, now it's been several years, there was no connection. It was just kind of made up.
No, and as we mentioned at the very top of the hour, Facebook knew that it was all bullshit. They knew it was all made up.
Yeah.
They knew that Hamilton 68 were just picking, some random granny from Omaha, Nebraska, and just declaring her to be part of a Russian troll farm.
Right. And this is how we got, CNN going down to Florida and confronting some, granny on her front yard about, well, you liked this thing on Facebook. Did you realize that it was Russian propaganda? She's like, whatever. I
don't know. Yeah, I don't know who posted it. I just liked it because I agreed with it. Yeah, but of course, everybody said, "Hey, this is all Russian." Well, Hamilton 68. We're all saying.
And what nobody ever says is that there were an equal number of Russian, propaganda that was against Trump, that was supporting Hillary. So, and overall, nobody has ever found any evidence that any of those things influenced somebody, even one person's vote.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter because the story is so good, we can't let it go because it justifies everything that comes.
Well, that's why it was great to begin the entire thing with McCarthy, right?
Yeah, because it doesn't matter how true or false it is. What matters is the importance of the narrative. Yeah, exactly. Right. And then, of course, January 20th, 2017, Donald Trump shows up. And I don't know, the press has always kind of acted as if he was a normal Republican. And I'm proud to say that we never acted as if he was a normal Republican. In fact, quite the opposite. Trump is an aberration. He does not meet sort of the criterion that we're familiar with throughout our lifetimes of what a Republican
candidate should believe. No, he's much closer to who was the last big populist back in turn of the 20th century?
William Jennings Bryan.
Yeah, William Jennings Bryan. That's I think the closest analog you're going to get to a Trump. A pure populist, has no clear economic, civil or foreign policy,
and
just America strong,
and no ties with the traditional Republican establishment at all.
Which is why he was he succeeded in a lot of things, but his biggest failure was in being able to drain the swamp. Matter of fact, the swamp kicked back against him pretty damn hard, really hard, and he was not able to ever successfully grab a hold of it because, I mean, they're like white blood cells trying to kick out an invasive predator, and that's how they treated him. That's how they worked, and he didn't have the personnel capability to really root that out. And I don't know that anybody does.
Well, the Democrats did because they had Bernie Sanders,
True.
who was equally a non-establishment figure and who was doing pretty well, but the Democrats managed to
They're super delegates.
they managed to hobble him. So Trump ends up
He
making
could win
it.
it. He actually won a couple primaries and
Yeah, exactly.
still lost the primary.
But they were able to get rid of him, the Republican Party, not able to get rid of Trump. And
Right.
so he got elected. And then, of course, we get that famous quote from Chuck Schumer. Let me tell you, take on the intelligence community, and they have 6 ways from Sunday at getting back at you. Well,
Yeah.
as it turns out, that is pretty
Pretty
prophetic.
fucking accurate.
Because what Trump did is something different. He didn't use traditional media. He used social media.
Right.
And connected directly with people. He didn't do
And
a lot
that's
of
another
big
reason they hated
media
him
ads.
so much, is because he found a way to go around their normal channels of communication. I mean, he really is a true populist. I mean, yes, his policies were good, and he was effective at doing what he did, but at the same time, he still couldn't. He didn't make a dent into the bureaucracy, which is where everything is run.
And right after he ran, people began to think about social media and how Donald Trump used it. And indeed, Hillary Clinton started blaming Facebook for the loss.
Right.
And Clinton's
Well, she's
people,
blamed everybody pretty much.
yeah, everybody but herself. And Clinton's people began to run a campaign that eventually went into the government to actually force the social media platforms to not just reform, but to basically toe the party line. And by the way, as we mentioned, one of their strategies was to go to the press, and the press, as you said, was all too happy to repeat the Clinton administration or Clinton campaign's claims. Donald Trump won because of Facebook. Facebook, in crosshairs after election, is said to question its influence. Russian propaganda effort helped spread fake news
Who
during
knew
election.
that $150,000 worth of ads on Facebook would swing an election?
Yeah, disinformation, not fake news, got Trump elected, and it is not stopping. Mark Zuckerberg initially just blew all that off and said, yeah, that's pretty crazy. And you know what? It was pretty crazy. However, once you get the Democratic Party, the press, and eventually the government blaming you, and saying that basically you were treasonous because you got Donald Trump elected thanks to Russian influence, well, and then, of course, Obama comes out and just accuses Facebook of doing it. Well,
Right.
I guess we'll have to have a new fake news control mechanism inside Facebook. So basically, he managed to stand up against that for a couple of weeks before he folded. And here's the thing. This is a false claim that Russia got Trump elected. Russia didn't get Trump elected. Trump got elected, barely, by the way. Let us not forget how narrow Trump's election victory was. Let us not forget that he lost the popular vote. He eked out an electoral win, largely because Hillary Clinton is one of the,
Forgot where Wisconsin was.
forgot where Wisconsin, hell, forgot where Pennsylvania was, forgot where Philadelphia was until the night or the Sunday before the election, and also was one of the most generationally unpopular politicians in American history.
That's a very important point. As a matter of fact, I mean, if you think about it, I would say for at least the last
30 years.
If not a little bit more, but yeah, that most of the votes are against the other candidate, not for the
And
actual
with Hillary Clinton, I'm fairly sure that's true. Hillary Clinton has not had a positive popularity rating since 1992.
Yeah.
She was unpopular as the first lady. She was, in fact, so unpopular that Bill Clinton, who started off putting
She
her
started
in,
that whole Hillary care thing.
yeah, he put
and
her
that
in
just
charge of
tanked her.
policy. That tanked her, and she's never been popular since. Sure, she can win
Right.
in New York City because she's got a D after her name.
Yeah.
Anybody can win in New
Right.
York City. She could probably win in California. But
Oh yeah.
But in general, she was an extraordinarily unpopular politician and a bad politician. I mean, how do you forget Wisconsin?
She's never been a good retail, unlike her husband, who may be the greatest retail politician of all time. Yeah, she has literally none of those skills. Zero. She's
So-
unlikable. She does not come across as empathetic or even knowledgeable of what you're going through.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sympathetic to the argument that Trump won on a fluke, but the fluke was he was running against
Against
one of the most unpopular politicians
horrible-
of our time.
Yeah, I think that I think that has a hell of a lot to do with it.
I mean,
to do
that
with it,
was
yeah.
the fluke. And let's not forget that his wins, like in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, I mean, he eked out 20 or 30,000 votes statewide in a 50-50 election in those
He
states.
barely got over the cheating that we didn't know was going on.
Yeah, I mean, he barely
At
pulled
the
it
same
over
time,
the top.
he also, one of the reasons he got the nomination in the first place was because everybody expected him, who voted for him, to be a bowling ball, to go in and knock down the traditional swamp creatures. And he did that to some extent, not as much as he promised or as much as people wanted. Although I don't necessarily blame that on Trump. It's a to try to knock down all at once. But that's what he was elected to do, to go in there and raise hell and create problems for the bureaucracy.
Well, I remember you and I talking, immediately after the election about Trump's election was a symptom of a problem that has not yet been addressed in American politics, which is that we only have two major parties in this country, so we only really have two choices at any given time, largely as a result of the structure of the presidential election process that's laid out in the Constitution. Because of the requirement of a solid majority of electoral votes, not a plurality, our system is designed to really come down to two candidates. That's just a structural limitation of the American system. And unfortunately, neither of those parties is saying what the American people want to hear. And, I always think
That's right.
I always think back to the old example that was put forward by the economist, and I can't think of his name off the top of my head, who popularized Art Laffer and who actually sort of provided the basis for Reaganomics. And one of the examples,
the Laffer curve.
but one of the examples he put forward in his book is if the Democratic Party is saying eagle, and the Democratic Party or the Republican Party is saying eagle.
I remember this, yeah.
The Democratic Party is saying chicken, and what the voter wants is duck.
Right.
And at every election, they have to figure out at this particular time
who's the closest to duck.
What's closest to duck, chicken or eagle? Because nobody ever gives them duck as an option.
Right.
And so when you have two parties...
This is the reason that a lot of people have talked about more parliamentary system. I don't really agree with that, but I understand the yearning for that, because in a parliamentary system, you have to form a coalition, and you're probably likely to get closer to duck. Maybe you can get goose. You know? Whereas in our system, for the supreme leader, you get two choices.
You get chicken or
chicken
eagle?
Or turkey.
Well,
or eagle, yeah.
So Donald Trump is a manifestation of, I believe, general dissatisfaction with the political choices that we are offered and the political policies that are delivered to us. And we could go back through Obama and Trump and currently Biden.
Oh, we could go back to
Bush.
2012 when we offered up the most milquetoast, likable, probably one of the most honest, not necessarily faithful to any philosophical degree, but certainly like one of the most harmless people you could have in Mitt Romney. And they turned him into Hitler. He was killing grandma. He was, torturing dogs, all this stuff. And after that, and I remember it being predicted, it's like, okay, well, guess what's going to happen next time? you got the soft version of Republican. Well, next time you're not going to get that choice. You're going to get something a lot harsher.
Yeah, Trump is the
it's
Trump
like
is the canary in
always says.
Trump is the canary in the coal mine.
Yeah, it's like Instapundit always says. Choose the form of your destructor, and it was chosen.
But he was not super effective at delivering that, although he did deliver some policies that some people liked.
That's right.
I think he was hampered by
that was his biggest failure,
personality.
actually, was not being able to wrangle the government to his side. His personnel choices were odd at best and disastrous at worst. He chose plenty of, I'm sure with a lot of advice from people like Pence and Mark Milley. He did not choose his cabinet wisely. He did not put people in places, with a few exceptions. I thought Nikki Haley as the UN ambassador was an inspired and very welcome choice, because she does not back down. But for the most part, actually, the education secretary, I forget her name, I thought she was good. But for the most part, I mean, they were just run-of-the-mill inside beltway types who did what they all do. They protect each other.
Yeah, but let's not get into a detailed analysis of the Trump administration's shortcomings and derail us from the importance of what happened.
Let's not worried about who killed who.
Yeah, the problem is that because Trump was an expression of, I believe, dissatisfaction with the American political system in general.
Yeah.
The rational response to that would be to say, okay, how do we make the political system more responsive to what the electorate wants?
Right.
The government's response was, okay, how can we sabotage this guy and his followers?
How do we arrest him and everybody that follows
to prevent it from happening? So we can take this false claim that Russians put Donald Trump in office in 2016, and we can use that as a justification now to look at what Americans say and to begin vetting what goes on in social media. And that, I think, was the justification for everything that followed. It was all based on a lie, this Russian disinformation deal, and yet it was the perfect justification for going after social media and began, essentially, as the article puts it, enforcing martial law online. So
well, you said justification. That's what they wanted to do it anyway, and then they had the justification.
Right. So
in their minds, at least.
So we're going to take this information weapons system that we built to fight ISIS and Al Qaeda, and we're just going to turn it around against the American people. So if you have incorrect thoughts about the president or vaccine boosters or gender pronouns or the war in Ukraine, we can come after you.
Dale, isn't there's something that makes that illegal for the government to do? I mean, the first thought out of my head is it's an amendment. I'm pretty sure that there's something there that says that that's not okay.
Yeah, this is all illegal. This is all blatantly illegal. It's certainly unconstitutional. It's a fundamental violation of the First Amendment. Not that they care, because they're fighting disinformation. And to save the village, we have to destroy it. And that is the justification. And by the way, we haven't even gotten into we actually want to run the village too. So,
well, and then that's the other issue. So not only are they blatantly violating the First Amendment, they're also blatantly violating pretty much every amendment by taking over our entire lives, which they have no power to do. This is not the federal government's
I would disagree with you. They don't have the authority to do it. But
they don't have the authority. Well, didn't I say that?
No, you said they don't have the power to do it. They don't have the authority, but the best available evidence is that they do have the power to do it.
Okay, yeah, okay, I get it. Yeah, they are not invested with the power. They don't have the authority to do it. That's correct.
However, it is back to what Thomas Sowell called 20 years ago the vision of the anointed. Their claim that they should have the right to remake the world based on their expertise. They can run your life better than you can. You just don't make good decisions.
Right.
And I can think back
that's exactly what it is. It's absolutely true.
And I always think the best example of this was Bill Clinton, who at one point,
right.
his middle class...
We give you the money, but we're not sure how you'd spend it.
His middle class tax cut. I'd love to give you your money, but I just don't think you'd spend it in the right way. That is it in a nutshell.
That's classic.
Yeah, we have the right to run the world, and you don't, because we're smarter and we're better and we're more moral, and we make better decisions. This is how
aristocracy has always acted. And that's the difference between Burkean aristocracy. Edmund Burke thought that aristocracy actually had a duty to use their wealth and privilege to better society, like an actual duty, that if you ignored it, you were being profligate. He One of the reasons he's considered a conservative or in the conservative line of thinking is because he recognized that a society cannot hold together if the elites, by class or privilege or socioeconomic status, could just do their own thing and expect something else from everybody else. He posited that in order to keep a society together, you not only have to set the ideal, you have to be the example you want to see realized in the world. But you also need to use your wealth and privilege to advance the education of others, whether that's through charity or setting up libraries or whatever it is. You need to use that in order to help the society grow and become more like what you want.
Yes, well, it's the idea of noblesse oblige, which
exactly.
which has morphed into, I can't educate you to live a better life, so what I'll do is just
let me take care of it.
Yeah, I'll fix it for you. You will own nothing and be happy, right?
Right. You can eat bugs.
Live in your pod, eat your bugs, walk to the store to buy your bugs in your 15-minute city, and go back to your pod and be happy.
Right.
And
don't you dare use anything more than a bicycle. Yeah, and we may take the bikes away from you too.
Well, because that requires the smelting of metal in some quantity. And the interesting thing is watching the reversal of this, because Hillary Clinton, the same person who back in 2010 was warning against internet censorship in authoritarian regimes, is now the same person who has become, and many other people alongside her, are the very same people now who are pushing for this sort of censorship in the United States. And one of the reasons...
Well, they tried this with net neutrality. That was the whole point behind net neutrality.
Yeah. And one of the reasons why they've started to push it is because they fell for their own lies. And this is the weird thing. And I don't know if it's falling for your own lies or simply using your own lies as an excuse. But apparently they felt that Silicon Valley could have stopped Donald Trump and just didn't. And that was a betrayal. And so then we end up with this idea that, okay, well, the tech companies got too powerful because data concentrated. So what do? We have two choices. We can go after them on antitrust and use the power of the government to try to make companies like Google or Facebook, well, now Meta, smaller, or we could just force them to drop the pretense of neutrality and force them to enforce the point of view that we want them to enforce. And given a choice between those two options, they chose the latter option. And so, therefore, they began to jump into going after social media companies. The way that they put it in the article, and I'm not sure that they're wrong, is that they knew they had a FISA warrant. They got their FISA warrant, but they also knew that the FISA warrant was bullshit, that it was based on bullshit, that it was false, that they had to lie to a federal judge to get it. And they knew that if it was held under too much scrutiny, it would not hold up. So disinformation solves that problem, because now we can go after the press and everybody else and start pushing that line in the press. And then it won't matter what happens. If we can push it in the press, we can push it in social media. It won't matter what happens eventually to the FISA warrant, because now we can get the public on our side by going after this disinformation claim. Once again, the Washington Post being perfectly happy, and other journalistic outlets like the New York Times, perfectly happy to parrot the claims that they were making about disinformation. And one notes in the Washington Post article, which, says that Russian disinformation is what swung the U.S. election. Who was their lead expert? The guy who made it up in the first place. And who, by the way, there's no possible way that he did not know this was made up. He had to know that this was all a lie. But now he's the lead expert that we're quoting. And there's a whole bunch of, experts who now come out of the woodwork and telling reporters that, hey, we've got evidence of collusion, credible evidence.
Yeah, they tell them what they want to know, or at least what they hope to print.
Exactly. So then they come up with this intelligence community assessment on Russian activities and intentions in recent elections, which they parrot as, well, this is what the intelligence community says. I mean, this is all of our intelligence agencies working together. In fact, was a lie. It was written by 5 agents who were handpicked by John Brennan.
Right. Oh, John Brennan. Was that the guy who voted for the communists in the 80s?
Yeah, exactly. And one of the guys who came out and said, the Hunter laptop has got to be Russian disinformation.
Yes,
it bears all the hallmarks of it. So this intelligence community assessment was not an intelligence community assessment. It was basically a pet report commissioned by John Brennan, who handpicked the authors of it.
It's not, you pull this back out to a 50,000-foot view. What's not corrupt? Is there anything that's not corrupt when it comes to our governance, to our information systems, to our methods of getting information? I mean, what isn't corrupted anymore?
That is
and
the fundamental
I have a hard
problem.
time answering that question.
Yeah, because that ICA worked. Because everybody believes, okay, well, Trump must have been elected, so therefore he just starts his administration under the shadow of having been put into place by the Russians. And so because of that, well, Homeland Security comes out and says, well, we have to designate U.S. election systems as critical national infrastructure. So now all 8,000 election jurisdictions now fall under DHS control. Because, elections are so important, we have to basically federalize them. And so that's what they get. In the last 2 weeks of the Obama administration, they finally get the power. DHS now gets to directly oversee presidential elections.
Which means that they can spy on anybody.
Pretty much. That now gives them the power to spy on anybody who might, interfere in an election. And this is
certainly anybody that has contact with any other person outside this country, which they've been doing for a very long time.
Yes, but here's the thing. Because social media is by definition global and can be seen anywhere by anyone, well, basically anything you post on social media now falls under their purview. Because it certainly is not just domestic American
Although I'm
consumption.
not sure where that duty is described in its statutory formation.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter because over the global war on terror, as I said earlier, we built this massive infrastructure. And just as Dwight D. Eisenhower
and we said this... Jesus, how long has it been? 20 years ago?
Yeah.
When it started, it was like, this is a bad idea. This is not a good idea.
And by the way, these agents never go away because they morph into these organizations that have their own constituencies, their own budgets, their own... It becomes, one of the reasons why...
Well, that's why it's so hard to get rid of the FBI.
Yeah, you can't get rid of a government
organization.
organization.
Been around since, what, the 30s?
Yeah.
And... it's obviously corrupt, and it's kind of always been corrupt. I don't remember when it wasn't corrupt.
Well, the whole reason they made J. Edgar Hoover the head of the FBI was because it was so corrupt. They named him the head to try to clean it up.
That was a smart choice.
Yes.
Well done.
Well, I think probably during the 30s it wasn't a bad choice. By the 1970s, Again, Lord Acton, power tends to corrupt. Absolute power tends to corrupt. Absolutely.
Yeah,
But,
well.
we have, and I don't know how we've had it. And I guess part of it is just good PR. But J. Edgar Hoover was a master at making the FBI look like a premier, competent, impartial.
He had some big successes in the late 30s, early 40s. He had a couple in the 50s.
Yeah, going after the
that, he
Japs
kinda-
and the Krauts and then the commies.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. And then it all went off the rails.
Well, he went after the mafias and bootleggers and that stuff.
Sure.
Never went after the Kennedys for.
But by the
some reason.
1960s, when Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. was playing the title role of not the title role, but playing the starring role in The FBI, a Quinn Martin production, on national television, the FBI was manufacturing evidence against Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
And sending him death threats.
And secretly listening in on him.
Oh, yeah.
Intercepting
Wiretapping
his
him
mail.
without warrants. Yeah, sure.
Yep.
Because they were largely unsupervised outside of the FBI. And the
Yeah.
same thing is happening to all of this surveillance, this electronic surveillance stuff that we set up during the global war on terror. So we built this huge machinery. Well, as it says here, we built this huge machinery around the global war on terror, a massive infrastructure. Well, okay. Billions and billions of dollars at stake. That constituency is now not going to go away. Once you have it forever.
Right.
And so then
and each year you got to justify your budget, so you're going to spend it.
Yeah, and so we move to today, and what you have is the Biden White House and all of the disinformation experts, and let's talk about that in a little bit, all telling us now, well, it's these QAnon people and the white nationalists, the Nazis. Well, they're going to destroy our democracy if they're allowed to speak freely. And of course, this is all because we just let social media get out of hand. And so now all these QAnon people have a place to talk to each other. This Trumpist ideology is all the fault of the tech companies because they wouldn't go after hate speech and fake news. So now
it's like the antithesis of Thomas Jefferson. It's like, let them speak freely. People will realize what idiots they are. I remember way back when I was at a Secondhand Conjecture, and we had some Stormfront. Is that what it is? I think it's Stormfront.
Oh, the American Nazi guys, yeah. Well, I don't know if they're Nazis. They're white nationalists. I don't.
They're basically Nazis, and they would come and comment, and I and the rest of our commenters and whatever would just toy with them, and it was kind of fun. I was like, no, I'm not going to ban you. No, I want you to keep talking. I want you to keep showing me how stupid you are. And the thing is, these people are not influential. They're literally, they drive themselves into a ditch. Once you converse with them, well, why would I believe you? Oh, because blah, 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 blah. Oh, really? Does that make any sense to you? Well, of course it does, because Herr Hitler said so. What? They really are that stupid.
Yes, and I guarantee you they know very little about what Herr Hitler actually said or thought.
Oh, yeah,
or
absolutely.
Wrote. Because, it's one of the things that Bill Shirer points out in The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, and also in Berlin Diary, is that you would go to any Nazi's home, and they would always have, a copy of Mein Kampf on the coffee table.
They had to, yeah.
Just so that, just so you could see. But he said the number of actual Nazis who could make it through Mein Kampf
right.
could probably be counted on one hand, because
I never did.
it was one of the worst books. I mean, it's unreadable just in its prose. It's this
Yes.
It's this weird stream of consciousness stuff that he just dictated to Albert Hess
The only
at
thing
Landsberg prison
I-
in 1927, and it's just it makes no sense whatsoever. It is not a coherent ideology in any way, shape,
It
or
is
form.
not. And I have a copy of it, and I'm sure, like you, I mean, I tried to read it. I wanted to see what this madman had to say, and like you said, it's incomprehensible. So is Das Kapital, actually, in weirdly similar ways. The only way to understand it is from the excerpts that you can find all over the place. So you can kind of like get these small crystallized ideas, and even those ideas are foundationally stupid. Like they really don't make any sense. They're just complaints. I mean, that's all they are.
Yeah, but in opposition to your rational judgment of how batshit crazy Mein Kampf actually is, the government has decided that Americans just simply can't be trusted to
That's
make
right.
up their own minds or to choose their own leaders. And if you disagree with what the government is saying,
Could you
you're
buy
an
that book
extremist.
now?
Mein Kampf? I don't know. It's not something I've looked up on Amazon recently.
I haven't
so
either.
I can't-
I wonder. I mean, like,
I'm
I
sure
kinda
it's a-
wonder what would happen if you did.
I'm sure it's available.
It's
But
got to be.
for those of you who have not read it, unless you are just intellectually curious, clearly it is not a book that I can recommend. And if you
No.
do get it, it's not a book that I can assure you you will understand once having read it.
If you're gonna look at, you know what? Go find it in a used bookstore.
Yeah,
There
because
might be a copy there.
because it is as I said earlier, batshit crazy.
But I mean, Das Kapital is the
Oh yeah,
same way.
Das Kapital is no better, and neither is the Communist
It
Manifesto.
actually is worse because it's so much longer.
Yeah, I mean, they're just. I think.
And then Hegel had to rewrite it several years later because of all the mistakes in it.
Yeah, I think William Shirer described Mein Kampf's prose as turgid, which I think is probably a better exception. But
That's a very nice way to
or a
put it.
better way of putting it. But here's the thing, and as this article points out, there are these Stormfront guys. I mean, heck, you can just type. What is it? Stormfront. I get stormfront.org.
I think it's Stormfront.
They have a website. I don't remember what the URL is. It's stormfront.something. And you can go there and see them. They exist. There are people in the KKK that walk around in their stupid
Yeah.
stupid hoods and stuff. I mean, they exist, but the idea that it's as common now as it was in the 1960s, that there has been no progress in this area.
It wasn't even that common in the 1960s.
No, and certainly it wasn't all that common outside of the South.
No. I mean, I think the 20s, early 30s
Yeah,
was maybe
20s
the
and
heyday.
30s, sure. 60s and 70s, not
Yeah, they were pretty much done by
so
then.
much. And the idea that now, 40 years later, this is a major force in American politics that requires the full force of
Right.
the United States government to handle, because it is so dangerous we can't handle it through our existing legal structure.
You can't even see. Don't even look.
Yeah, and by the way, it's the other idea, which is even more dangerous. First of all, it's just complete bullshit that this is a major problem in the United States. But here is the major problem. The difference between speech and action is being erased. That speech
Yes.
is a problem. Speech is violence. Speech is harmful. Speech is hateful. That is a philosophical idea that is incoherent, first of all, but has so infected the ruling class that they truly believe it. And so you end up with guys like Clint Watts, who pops up again. Civil wars don't start with gunshots. They start with words.
Yeah, well, guess who's doing the words that are going to start a civil war? It's not the right
Yeah, but,
or the middle.
we can say, well, racist memes lead directly to mass shootings and violent protests, and stuff that you say on Facebook could lead people to overthrow the government. Speech has to be catastrophized.
Yep.
And after that, everything follows. And so, if people say bad things on the internet, well, that leads directly to, domestic terrorism. So we began to use all of these.
Which is a really sort of choked down term, because it only applies to very certain groups. It certainly doesn't apply to Black Lives Matters. Certainly doesn't apply to Antifa. It only applies when we're talking about essentially any the Proud Boys.
Anything to the right of me is
exactly.
disinformation.
And it's domestic terrorism. Any action they take, even if they're not violent, is still violent because of the words they say.
And outside of the government, it's now in non-governmental organizations that are getting into it. Charities, philanthropies, foundations.
But that's the whole game. Dale, you know this. That's the grift. In order, hey, we've got to stop all this, and you need to give me lots of money so I can fund myself and others, so that I can tamp down on this and make those baddies stop.
And by the way, we know this. We have this study from Kennedy School Shorenstein Center on Media Politics, the fight against disinformation in the USA, in the U.S., a landscape analysis. And it basically says, to save democracy, we should have philanthropists get in bed with the government to help combat this disinformation. Okay, I know what the government's interest is, and now I know what George Soros and Reid Hoffman's interest is.
Pierre Omidyar, you got it right there.
Oh yeah, Pierre Omidyar, or Omidyar. Yeah, exactly. I can make money off of this. I can grab funding off of this, and of course, my organization is conveniently tax exempt.
Well, it's interesting too that a lot of these people also have government entities or NGOs that get funded by governments or places like the UN, the EU. And this is how they get, status points.
Yeah, sure, because the government provides funding to these organizations to assist with their disinformation efforts, stuff that the government might not be legally authorized to do directly. They can now do indirectly by funding it through private organizations.
Funny that.
Philanthropies, charities, and of course, they're charities. How could they possibly not have our best interests at heart? But of course, this is all just a vicious circle. So what you end up with are these charities that create the fact-checking industry, for example. Places like the Poynter Institute or what have you.
This is my favorite part of the article, by the way.
Who do factcheck.org, right? And of course, the International Fact-Checking Network, which sounds very official and sounds like it would just get to the bottom of any sort of misinformation with the correct...
No misinformation at all.
Yeah, except...
We're international.
Except, and by the way, this takes me directly to a sort of side here when we're talking about these fact-checking organizations, and takes us right back into COVID and just taking a look at the lab leak theory, and people who said, hey, this might have come from this lab in China. Tucker Carlson guest airs debunked conspiracy theory
Right.
that COVID-19 was created in a lab. This, of course, coming from PolitiFact, a direct organ of the Poynter Institute. Oh, when this fact was first published in September, well, we had researchers who asserted the SARS-CoV-2 virus could not have been manipulated. That assertion is now more widely disputed. Oh, is it? More widely disputed. Because we know at the time that this was basically a project of Peter Daszak, who had a vested interest. But okay, debunked conspiracy theory. This is our fact check on Tucker Carlson. Well, how about this? A report resurrects the baseless claim that the coronavirus was engineered, coming from factcheck.org, from the Annenberg Public Policy Center. So we have both
That's
NGOs.
actually a big. So Annenberg is actually was at the University of Pennsylvania, I think. But that's like an actual, supposedly, big think tank. You
Yes.
know, and this is how debased they are.
Yeah, so their fact checks turn out to be, well, not true.
Not true.
And here's an example from Poynter, which is an NGO, and from the Annenberg Public Policy Center, which is an academic organization. So now we've got the government, we've got this fact-checking industry, and we've got academic institutions all jumping in to defend the party line, even as we know now,
Essentially,
that party line is indefensible. And by the way, who are these fact-checking experts? Where did they all come from? How could so many people become experts in the field of disinformation? And as they put it here, the expertise in disinformation involves ideological orientation, not technical knowledge. It's all about narrative, not about the truth. And so we get back to the government and the DHS saying,
Li Fang, didn't he used to write for I swear he used to write for what's his name? One of the progressive blogs. And then he all of a sudden switched sides. I mean, he's been a very good. I've seen him and I'm sorry, I know this is an aside, but all of a sudden he has become a deep diver on doing real actual independent research and investigative journalism. It just surprises me because I remember him writing Josh
Marshall?
Was it Josh Marshall?
At TPM?
It was Think Progress?
Yeah, TPM.
Yeah, Think Progress. I swear he used to write at Think Progress.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of people who were on the left in the early 2000s who have decided not to jump on the progressive bandwagon and stay old-style lefties. And one of the old-style lefty things was civil libertarianism.
Yeah, well, it's Matt Taibbi, right?
Yeah, and civil rights.
And what's his face? The other guy who did all the Twitter things.
I don't know who you're talking about.
He's always got the cap on.
Oh, Tim Pool.
Yeah, Tim Pool.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure that he is still a lefty. I mean, he's a big Trump supporter at this point, so I'm not sure how left wing
I
he
think
still
that's
is.
more of a reaction. I think it's more of a fuck you than a ideological thing. And it's not like Trump is like, any kind of righty, you know, God or anything. He's still what he's always been, a sort of middle of the road, get things done person.
One of
But
our
anyway, I
one of our
just wanted to mention that about Li
yeah
Fang.
one of our commenters says
I just
Tim's
noticed-
getting more left libertarian day by day. I'm not certain what a left libertarian is, although I have heard
I've
the
never
term.
understood that term.
Neither have I. That aside, now that we have the NGOs in it, then we have the DHS saying, well, why don't we just use these NGOs as a clearinghouse for information to avoid the appearance of government propaganda, which works out really nice because now these same institutions that should be watchdogs on the government can now rent themselves out to the government to manufacture whatever the consensus should be on the party
Can't
line.
beat them, join them.
And then we have COVID-19. And so now you have the tech companies who are caving under this government pressure. So, we'll just censor Google. We'll just censor anything that conflicts with the WHO's recommendations or the CDC's recommendations. So we'll just consider all of that to be misinformation. And it doesn't matter if the guidance we receive from this organization changes. So if it's going to be wearing masks or not wearing masks or travel bans or saying that it's contagious or saying that it comes from a library or anything like that, whatever, or not a library, a laboratory, whatever the current narrative is from the government, we will go ahead and just put that as part of our terms of service. And so we'll just censor it. And it doesn't help when President Biden comes out and says these companies are killing people by not censoring vaccine disinformation. And then you go to start having the White House send out ban lists or censorship lists, one of which included Alex Berenson, who was kicked off Twitter after tweeting that mRNA vaccines don't stop infection or transmission, which
Everything that
is
Alex
true.
Tweeted out was completely true. He had done the research. He did the deep research. He brought receipts. He left nothing. He was not out there just like tweeting away. He was actually providing information, and he got kicked off Twitter because of that.
And the health authorities at the time either knew that it was true or they were
Right.
simply misinformed. Guess which I think that is the most likely of those two. And the people knew all along that what Berenson was saying was correct. Nevertheless, the government wanted him censored, and he got censored. I don't
did.
think we need to have any more dots that we need to connect than that.
I agree. I think it's pretty straight line.
Even in 2020, at the in the FDA's own meeting minutes, Pfizer has presented no evidence in its data today that the vaccine has any effect on virus carriage or shedding, which is the fundamental basis for herd immunity. They knew that the vaccines
And yet-
would not stop transmission.
At the same time, Biden was saying, if you get the vaccine, you're not going to spread it.
Exactly. In fact, mandating the vaccine and even suggesting that people who didn't get the vaccine were murderers. You don't
And
get the vaccine, you're killing other people.
And again, this is a little bit of an aside, but now we're going back into vaccine panic in some areas. Not that many right now, but they're trying to push another vaccine, or excuse me, another COVID panic having people mask up and whatever else. I hope to God that people are more resistant this time.
Yeah, I do too. Especially in an environment where the DHS is encouraging children to report their own family members for disinformation if they challenge the U.S. government narratives on COVID-19.
Comrade.
Yeah, and by the way, the U.S. government's narratives change too. It really is Orwellian in the sense of 1984, where, Winston Smith's job at the Ministry of Truth was to find what the old party line was and erase it so that it looked like the current party line.
Mm-hmm.
The
We've
party,
always been at war with East Anglia.
Yeah, or East Asia. The party is always right. And that's exactly what this amounts to. The party is always right. And anything you say that disagrees with the party automatically gets called disinformation. And takes us to Hunter Biden's laptop. We all know that that's a real laptop, that it really was Hunter Biden, that it was Hunter Biden's, but we can't say that. So we end up with this whole Hunter Biden thing, 50 intelligence officials coming out, threatening the press, saying this is a false story, this is all Russian disinformation, you shouldn't be publishing this. The FBI actually coming up even before it was released, telling Twitter and Facebook, well, that's some Russian disinformation.
Yeah, they gave them the
coming
pre-warning,
out.
That's right.
Yeah, giving them pre-warnings that it was going to come out.
That's again part of the Twitter files.
And yes, and of course, once the New York Post published the story, they were banned on Twitter.
Yeah, that story was buried.
Yeah, intentionally.
And lo and
so.
behold, it turned out that when I can't remember who did it. I think it was Reuters. Did a post election, interviews of voters, and there was something like 60%, maybe a little less, of independents who would have changed their vote if they had known that story. But they didn't know.
No, they were intentionally kept from knowing.
Right.
And again, the attitude being that Americans' political views need to be censored because, it could come from foreign agents. But now it's gone beyond that. Who cares if it comes from foreign agents? We'll just go after them anyway, because any sort of domestic disinformation is a greater threat to elections, a greater threat than falsehoods flowing from foreign interference. So we've now taken the step from, okay, now we got to figure out what foreigners are saying, to it doesn't matter what foreigners are saying. It matters what Americans are saying, and they have to be stopped. We have to have our own Ministry of Truth in the United States, because Americans saying like what they want to say about politics is too dangerous to be allowed.
It's like that old Jim Treacher quote, that the media is in charge so that Americans don't hear stories that might reflect badly on Democrats.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, and that's exactly what we have. And so, let's look at what we actually end up.
Oh, this is a big, 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 big list.
22 million tweets labeled misinformation on Twitter. 859 million tweets collected in misinformation databases. 120 analysts monitoring social media misinformation for 20-hour shifts. 15 text platforms monitored for misinformation in real time.
Wow. That one right there, the next one.
Less than 1 hour average response time between government partners.
That's huge.
And tech platforms.
Everybody here has dealt with government on some level on the phone. It may be the DMV, it may be your local tax office, whatever it is. Less than an hour average response time. Are you kidding me? I don't get that kind of reaction to anybody in my local government.
Well, clearly you should be tweeting about it.
Yeah.
Dozens of misinformation narratives targeted for platform-wide throttling. Hundreds of millions of individual Facebook posts, YouTube videos, TikToks, and tweets impacted due to misinformation terms of service policy changes. And the DHS is openly
By the way,
bragging about
was there a TikTok advertisement during the Republican debate?
I don't know. I didn't watch the Republican debate.
I didn't either, but I heard something about the fact that there was some sort of TikTok. I mean, during the Republican debate, like, they clearly did not coordinate with whoever was broadcasting it. Anyway, sorry, that was just an aside.
Yeah, but here's the thing. They're not thinking of this as a bad thing. They're bragging about it. You know, I don't know if you've ever
They're
seen...
shoving in our faces. That's absolutely true.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever seen The Big Short. And there is a scene in The Big Short where Mark Baum is talking to some mortgage brokers in Florida. And one of the guys says, oh, yeah, I write up, variable rate mortgages for immigrants. And the other guy's like, yeah, I just write them up for strippers. They don't have any income verification. They're all in cash. Who cares? I can sell them on Monday. I just write one on Sunday and I can have it sold to a mortgage company by Monday. And Mark Baum pulls one of his guys aside and he says, why are they confessing? And his employee says, they're not confessing. They're bragging. And that's what this is. The shadow campaign that saved the 2000 election.
Right.
It's like, here is how we broke the law and violated the Constitution to try to ensure that Donald Trump wouldn't get reelected. Here is how we
found that very, very strange. That, well, that was actually a great way to describe it, because it was. I mean, they are bragging. I mean, that's literally what that whole Time article was about. Was to brag about how we stopped the motherfucker.
Exactly.
Wait a minute.
We violated the law and the Constitution, but Donald Trump isn't president. Didn't we do a great job?
Yeah, you can thank us now.
Yeah, because, we saved the nation. For instance, a new book, American Resistance, by neoliberal national security analyst David Rothkopf, is subtitled The Inside Story of How the Deep State Saved the Nation.
Mm-hmm. The deep state, which up until now, they denied existed.
Yes, and now it's become a sobriquet that they glory in as being members of the deep state.
Absolutely, they're proud of it.
So what we
this is like, this is literally all the telltale signs of an ensconced aristocracy, which is what I think we have with our elite.
Yes, we have a ruling class now, which we can define.
Yes.
And we know who they are.
Yep. And they've gotten tired of the rubes, and they're now shoving it in our faces.
Well, of course, because to be a member of the ruling class is to
control what you do.
Yeah, to be a member of the ruling class is to believe that only your class can be allowed to lead the country.
Right.
I mean, that is a foundational belief.
I mean, this is we're boiling on France in 1788.
Yeah, I think we are. And it basically comes to this. They alone can legitimately wield power. And any challenge to their authority is an existential threat to civilization. No, it's not.
That's exactly right.
It's just an existential threat to your authority. Civilization will be fine. And there's other examples of people who just don't care about it, like the thing about um, Sam Harris, who basically just went off the deep end. I don't care if Hunter Biden had corpses of children in his basement. I would not have cared, as long as Trump didn't get real.
Sam Harris is smarter than that too, and I was really disappointed when he did that. I think better of him than that.
I used to.
I mean, he and I obviously don't agree, but I've always liked the fact that he could intellectualize an argument and be germane, upfront, and relevant with his evidence and his arguments. I don't necessarily agree with him. Actually, I pretty much disagree with everything, but I appreciate the fact that he will at least meet me on a medium level, right? That was so disappointing. I don't care if he did this, blah 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 blah.
Yeah, that was old Sam Harris.
Well,
this is new Sam
you've
Harris.
lost your grip, man. You really lost. You've lost the plot.
Yeah, Trump derangement syndrome. It is real, and he's perfect example of it.
There was Obama derangement. I mean, this has been going on now for really since the Clinton years, right? Clinton should not have been impeached. It was an absolutely ludicrous thing that they went after him for, and they went after him from day one.
What is more ludicrous, do you think, the fact that Bill Clinton got impeached or that Joe Biden hasn't been?
I think, well, I'm not sure that he won't be impeached, but certainly Biden is more deserving of impeachment than anybody since
Richard Nixon.
Nixon would have been the most closest. He didn't get impeached, but he would have been impeached.
He would have been,
and rightly so. Andrew Johnson should not have been impeached. I think that Biden should absolutely be impeached for several reasons. His treatment of the border, his absolute negation of any law, including the Supreme Court. He is still paying money that he doesn't get to spend in order to get rid of student loans for people who shouldn't have their student loans just evaporate.
Yeah, and
despite what the Supreme Court said.
Yeah, he knows it's illegal. He's doing it anyway.
And it's just like you're blatantly violating the Constitution and the border as well. You're blatantly violating the Constitution by not only letting the borders be open. I mean, they've actually welded gates open at the border.
Yeah. They've cut open the wall and welded gates open.
They've been selling off materials so they can't build the wall.
Suing the state of Texas to pull those buoys out of the Rio Grande.
They're suing the state of Arizona in order to stop them from doing anything to prevent migrants from coming in. And then they're sending fucking money to New York City because, they got a migrant crisis. Are you fucking kidding me? Go to Eagle Pass. Go to El Paso. You fucking degenerates. Oh, it just pisses me off so much.
Yeah, well, let's finish this off. And then in any time that we have left, and we've been doing this for an hour and a half, so I'm not sure how much
Sorry,
time
I got a little passionate.
I know. I agree with you completely. The really frightening thing about this is that what we're building is a system where we just prevent any non-narratively associated views from just being published in the first place. We're already, in fact, doing this in Germany with Google and their pre-bunking initiative to just try to prevent people from seeing anything that they don't want you to see.
They're doing this in
timeline.
England and Canada and Australia as well.
Yeah, England, Canada, Australia, they're all coming into this. And of course,
this is the only place in the entire world that actually has a First Amendment right.
Exactly.
And they are doing everything they can to undermine that First Amendment.
And there is no way.
There's no place to move. If you want First Amendment rights, there's no place else you can go. This is it.
No, and the Europeans this week have just made it official that you are now going to be censored online, and that only certain views are going to be allowed, because free speech.
Oh, you say the wrong thing, they'll send the cops to you.
Well, you have to understand.
This happens in Scotland and in England all the time.
Yeah, because free speech threatens democracy as much as it also provides for its flourishing. It's both a blessing and a curse. Sure, you should be able to say some things, approved things, but unapproved things, well, that threatens democracy. So to save liberal democracy, America must become less free and less democratic. Censorship is necessary to protect American democracy. And basically, we now have a regulatory framework to replace the U.S. Constitution simply by calling things disinformation.
Is that Reich?
Robert Reich. Yes, that is Robert Reich.
Yeah, it's the guy you interviewed. Yeah.
Yeah, former Clinton Labor Secretary Robert Reich. The ruling class just doesn't.
Got to be one of the stupidest people on the planet.
Yeah, the ruling class does not want to be questioned, and therefore, they will use the entire surveillance apparatus of the government to try to ensure that we can't question them. And even more importantly, not that we can't question them, but if nobody can question them, how do we figure out what they're doing? With this level of censorship, and this goes back to something we've talked about before, how do we know what the truth is? How do we find the truth? The government says X. We already know that X may or may not be true. We just know from our lived experience of the past 3 years that the government is wrong about a whole bunch of stuff. But if we can't have access to information, how do we know that? How do we learn that we are being lied to? I think the only thing that you can do, the only logical and rational course of action that one can take at this point, is to assume that everything the government says is a lie until proven otherwise.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
And it's not just the government.
Latin phrase. It's who watches the watchers, right?
Yeah.
So our watchers, our representatives, what are they doing? And how well are they informing us? Not very well. And that has got nothing to do with party. It's got everything to do with the rich men north of Richmond. They're very ensconced in their own little world, and they're happy to be there. There are some exceptions. I will grant that, and on both sides. But for the most part, they're perfectly happy to be in their own little world and do their own little thing, and the rest of the world be damned.
As long as their power and their influence isn't affected, you're free to do whatever you want to do unless it conflicts with what they want you to do.
That's pretty much how it works.
They'll let you be as free as they can, but you have to understand that they will define the limits. And so the idea of a free country where you control your life
it's feudalism.
is gone. Yeah, the idea of a free country where you can control your life is basically gone.
You live on my land, you will do my bidding.
And the only question left is, what are we going to do about it?
I'm scared to answer that question, to be honest.
Yeah, because this,
I don't think it's going to last much longer. I really don't. I think, and so earlier in the week, we had talked about bringing up Oliver Anthony and why that song, Northman, North of Richmond, resonates. And I don't want to go into it now because I know you were getting it ready to end. But um, I think there is a revolutionary spirit out there. I think he captured that quite eloquently. Um, it's, I guess, sort of a populist song. It's not a righty or a lefty song. It's just a
which he makes clear, by the way.
anti-establishment song, right? It's, you people got yours, but where's ours? We put you up there. Where the fuck are you coming through for us? It's a very, very populist tune, and I think it expresses what a lot of people think, in broad terms, not in specifics, policy or anything like that. Just the sense that, hey, you all are getting yours. What are you doing for us? All I see is you getting richer and richer, and none of us are getting a damn thing. All we get is hurt and hurt and hurt.
Yeah, if eggs are $7 a dozen, it doesn't hurt Bill Gates all that much.
No.
But
are you kidding me? When bacon is fucking $8 a pound, are you fucking kidding me? Come on.
Yeah, well,
well, it's always, and there are reasons for it, but I don't want to get deep in that. But when milk costs as much as gas or more, something's a little askew, right?
Yeah, this is not the system that we have, and it's not really the system that we've built since World War II, because the post-World War II system generally ensured fairly broadly based increases in prosperity.
At first, yes. In the very early 50s, yes.
That system has morphed into something different.
I think there was the Great Society, Dale.
It's the Great Society, but also the financialization of everything.
Yes.
Has not been good, and it certainly hasn't been good for the middle class. And the middle class has been stagnating since the 1970s.
Especially when you're putting everything on credit, and you got to pay interest on
credit.
And yet you put things in savings, you don't get anything out of that.
Yeah, it's funny how if I buy something on my credit card, and I don't know what my credit card interest rate is, but it would not surprise me to see it somewhere around 16 to 20%. So I tend not to want to use a credit card a lot, or at least pay it off every month. But if I put money in a money market account, where it's locked away from me for 30, 60,
at least
90
4%.
days. 4%?
I mean, at minimum.
You mean at best 4%? That's the
money market? Okay, yeah, no, you're right. Money market. Well, yeah, if you do it for 15 years or something, yeah, then you're talking.
Yeah, but what
5%?
Yeah, but what if I just do a 90-day money market, where I can't even touch my money now for 3 months?
Hell, you could do a CD. That'll be 3%.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. My interest rate is 17%, but if I give the bank unsecured cash, my payment back on that is around 2% on a 90-day money market.
Right.
So That's a lot
How
of
am I making out on
that's
this?
a lot of that's a
Why
lot of
am I playing this game?
yeah, that's a lot of arbitrage that's going on between those two interest
Right.
rates. Now, obviously, banks don't usually do credit card. Well, actually, banks usually do credit cards. A large portion of banks' business is unsecured loans. We have this
There
old
are well,
we have this
there
old
are
idea of banks just doing mortgages, but that's not all that they do anymore.
well, I mean, there are certain banks. So most of them are in North Dakota and Delaware that do the credit cards because they get favorable um, legal terms. Um, and yeah, they do get. I mean, obviously they get. I mean, they're not going to set themselves up to fail. They're going to put themselves in the best position possible, which fine. Um, but if I go to a local bank, why can't I get anything better than? I mean, at best, I might be able to get 1 or 2% interest on a savings account. I'm just putting money into it. I'm not taking anything out.
Yeah, and in fact, you have restricted withdrawals from savings accounts because
Right. So it's like, what's going on here?
we
And
seem
and people feel that. So again, going back to the Oliver Anthony thing, like people recognize that, like, I don't feel like I'm getting a fair fucking deal here. I see you all making money. I'm struggling to get by. I got dogs to feed. I've got kids to feed. I've got a lady to take care of. I got to work, 10 hours a day, probably 6 days a week. Where am I getting ahead? And how do I get ahead? I mean, if I can't survive on that, what the fuck is wrong with this system?
all of
I
which
totally get that
all of
complaint.
which makes me wonder how long this system can last and what we have to do to replace it. And how do we ensure that we don't replace it with something far worse? That's my big fear. Um,
Well, that's always the big fear, right? Because just because this one didn't work out doesn't mean the next one won't be worse. I mean, that's the
yeah,
whole
it's
frying
it's
pan
always
fire.
it's always easy to say it's time to grab a rifle, head up into the hills, and raise an
Right.
army. That's the easy part. But if you look back in history, other than the American Revolution, it is very, very difficult to find any sort of civil war or revolutionary movement whose end
I mean, the
result.
only other one I can think of is the Polish with what's his face, Vladislav Vaclav. What was his name? At the end of after the Berlin Wall fell.
Yeah, but look, those weren't revolutions. I mean, nobody was grabbing guns and shooting. I mean,
It
the
wasn't
only
really a
the,
revolution, but it was certainly. I mean, it was sort of a revolution. It
well,
wasn't a
look,
bloody revolution.
that was the Soviet-backed governments losing legitimacy and being replaced
Right.
largely peacefully with democratic
What the hell was
governance.
his name? Vaclav?
There was Václav Havel in Czechoslovakia.
Havel. That's it.
But again, those were all peaceful transitions, with the exception of the
True.
one
Yeah,
country
that's
that,
true.
with the exception of one
Yeah,
country that had a
violent.
civil war, Yugoslavia.
Yeah, that's right. The violent revolutions, civil wars, um, have rarely worked out. America is definitely an outlier there.
Because any other time that you can almost look back anywhere in history where there's been a violent revolution, things have, it's the Who song, meet the new boss, same as the old boss.
Right, exactly. It's just a new ruler.
Yeah, but all of the institutions remain. Our fundamental problem is that we have to rebuild all of these institutions from the ground up. I don't think a civil war
But do we
does that.
need all these institutions? I mean, I think that's part of the problem is that, maybe we have too many institutions and we've
Well,
been taught
we
for
have too many government
far
institutions.
too long that these institutions are um, praiseworthy and beyond reproach. You know what? Maybe back in 1930s that was true. since FDR um, um, and what's his face, JBJ, whatever. Um, that I don't think that these institutions are necessarily praiseworthy. I think they're piling problems on top of problems, and the government is far too big. It's unmanageable. It is Leviathan, and it's not controllable
But we keep
unless you get rid of it.
but we keep coming back because we tried this in the early 20th century too with a much smaller government. The technocratic fallacy. If only
LBJ, that was
LBJ. Yeah, if only we could just turn this over to the proper experts, they would be able to run all of this stuff.
right. Yeah, a Dear G system.
Yeah, that just doesn't, that's not how it works because all of
No,
these agencies then maintain or grow and maintain constituencies whose primary reason for existing is preventing reform of the agency in any way.
that's exactly right. Yeah, well, that's what Buchanan, um, from George Mason, he won the uh, Nobel Prize in economics for public choice theory, uh, showed pretty damn well that they're just as self-interested as anybody else, and they don't want to work themselves out of a job. They want to make sure that they're always needed. And we see the same thing with NGOs, with charities, with any kind of government agency. They want to keep themselves in a job. So they will always, always find problems that they have to tackle in order to keep their jobs. They don't care about what it costs the public. They care about their own self-interest.
Well, look, we could talk about the global war on terror, and let's talk about the um, the Food and Drug Administration's Department of Animal Welfare, whose job is to go out and ensure that farm animals are not mistreated, basically. But if you got a global war on terror, some of those farm animal inspectors, well, they need to be part of a SWAT team. And they need
Crazy.
they need fully automatic weapons because how are they going to participate in the global war on terror
It might be
and
Muslims.
the funding that comes, well, who knows what cows believe. Um,
I bet they're all Hindus.
well, if they were reasonable about it, they certainly would be. But now the Department of Animal Welfare has its own SWAT team that can be on call for national emergencies. Their job is to go to farms and say, hey, these animals healthy? Yeah, they look fine. That's
You
it.
know what? Okay, so fine. So why do we need the FBI then? If every agency has its own SWAT team, why do we need the FBI? Aren't they superfluous?
Yeah, see, that's the thing. If you have an FBI, you don't need postal inspectors, and you
Right,
don't need IRS agents, and you don't need all
right.
of these other things. You have an FBI. But if
And
you
yet we
but
have
if every
all of them
single
and
agency,
the FBI.
yeah, every single agency has its own law enforcement arm,
Right.
then why
Which
the
we did up until what? The FBI was started in the 1930s.
19 teens actually, although it was a minor nothing organization until J. Edgar Hoover took it over. But yeah, but no, we every single agency has their own SWAT team, even the FDA, the Department of the Interior. Uh, and why, if you are in the IRS, why does the IRS need a SWAT team?
Well, I mean, the Treasury agents, I can understand that,
Okay, but that's the Secret Service. We have
but
them.
they should be. But that's what I mean is, you don't need two. Treasury agents should be also in charge of the IRS. Um,
Yeah, you would think, but
what?
that's not how it works because every single
No,
one
of
of
course
these
not.
agencies
Because
come up
each
with a
one
way.
has to have its own budget and its own cadre of weapon wielding.
Yes, with millions of rounds of ammunition that they've been buying over the last couple of years. It's insane. And so when I say how do we rebuild these institutions, my implication is not that we, put everything back the way it was, but make them accountable.
So you know how we talked about when
rebuilding the fundamental structure of the government, and I don't know how we go about.
Do you know how we
that.
talked about when society just dies,
collapses? Yeah.
And first thing is raid your neighbor, go to the closest pharmacy, get as much ampicillin, penicillin,
antibiotics. They're never going to be made again.
As you can. And I think the next thing is go to the closest federal government storehouse and find as much ammunition as you possibly can.
Well, they've got to have.
There's got to be a ton in there.
I don't know how lying well around everywhere. Yeah, well, look, you're not going to be able to store it for the next 20 years now that society has collapsed and you're living in the post-apocalyptic wasteland. So, you got to take what you can get.
Hey, but it looks scary if you've got at least it cocked. You can see that there's a bullet in there.
But my fear is that Donald Trump is the least dangerous and most acceptable alternative that is heading our way.
You know what? That's a reasonable fear because, well, there is an advantage in the fact that he would only have one term, but that can also be a disadvantage because he's just as likely to kind of go off the reservation.
He's going to be hamstrung in a second term. I don't know who he's going to get that will want to work in his administration.
Well, and that's my biggest problem is that I don't know how he can get anybody to work with him. And he can't do it all by himself. This is my problem with Vivek Ramaswamy, who I really like, but it's dude, who are you going to hire? Who's going to actually work with you?
Okay, well, I don't like Vivek Ramaswamy because I think he's a phony.
I don't think he's a phony.
Yeah, I do.
I mean, I certainly like whatever. He's not going to make it anyway. The one reason that I like DeSantis is that I think because of his time up on the Hill, he has enough contacts that he can build an actual cabinet and put people in place who are trustworthy and useful.
Well,
I don't think Trump can do that.
I just don't know who would want to work in a Trump administration based on...
Yeah, you're going to get sued. You're going to get charged with felonies. I mean,
yeah, based on the experience of all of the other people. And by the way, not just the fact, and we talked about it a bit 2 weeks ago before our hiatus, because of the hurricane, which was going to destroy Southern California. Although there
yeah,
was...
so where are you down in Malibu now?
Huh? No, I'm exactly where I was. We had rain and gusts of 30 to 40 miles an hour. It was a nightmare.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So Southern California had weather. Although
you got a chair blown over? We will rebuild.
A number of places in town did have power outages, and that was what I was afraid of. We didn't happen to have one.
Well, that's what I was worried about. Yeah,
we didn't happen to have one here.
And that was a reasonable worry.
Yeah.
It's not like California has the greatest power system.
No. But in any event, let's talk about the election and all of that other stuff at a different time, because we're now approaching 2 hours into this, so it's probably time.
Approaching 2 hours? I think we're over 2 hours.
Okay, well, then we really do need to stop, because I can see
I really need to pee.
I can see our concurrent
I'm gonna have to
viewers
pee in a
number
bucket
falling.
here.
All right, well, then I will... I pardon you. I release you. You can go do what you need to do.
Oh, thank you, sir.
We'll talk to you later, Michael. You've been
buddy.
listening to the Observations podcast for Sunday, the 27th or something like that of August 2023. Thanks for watching. We appreciate the fact that you do. Hope you'll be back with us next time. Until then, have a great week. So long.